So hi everyone, welcome to this session. I will let my panelists introduce themselves because that's the best way to be introduced, right? Can we start with the lady, please? First.
Yes, my name is Christiane Ulriksen. I'm working as a consultant within the data center industry, and I'm also on the advisory board of the Norwegian Data Center Association.
I'm Andreas Tomasz. I'm with Lenovo. I sometimes joke that besides running the HPC and AI team for Lenovo, a couple of markets in Europe, my team is actually building heating systems that by accident compute a lot faster than other systems. So,
hello, my name is Tuan Hong. I'm with Schneider Electric, and I manage the cooling business for globally, especially with the liquid cooling for AI infrastructure.
And thank you, sir. Hello, everybody. Michael Winterson. I'm the Secretary General of the European Data Center Association, whose primary purpose is to lobby Brussels on regulations that impact our industry, including Energy Efficiency Directive and the upcoming AI and Cloud Act.
So we had a conversation a couple of days back. So we have a couple of questions that we put together for the panelists, and I know that Andreas, you had already a session in the morning. And I know that, Christine, you're having a panel again, so I don't want to steal your thunder for later on. So, on the first sort of like touching base, there's a major set of revolutionary cooling tech happening at the moment, right? So we have solid state cooling, we've got magnetocaloric cooling, thermoelectric cooling, all of different techs coming up, also in like sort of like in the popular media like BBC and so on, reporting on this. So my question to you guys is, Andreas and Michael insights on liquid cooling when we were discussing over emails and over the call, and retrofitting and new building dynamics. And Christiane, you were also saying about sustainability on the call. So my question was, I think for the panel, how do we reconcile the tension between increasing AI cheap heat densities, right, on one hand, and the drive for more sustainable and scalable cooling strategies? How do you feel about that? Do you have? You want to go first?
Just one of the things I've been hearing today is we're talking about existing data centers that need to support AI loads and future data centers. Just to put this into perspective, so I've been building data centers for about 25 years. Pretty early on in the European data center market. Where we are today, about 2,500 commercial data centers, 100 terawatts of capacity, terawatt hours per year. We're looking at tripling this in another 7 to 10 years. So think of old estate, the state that exists, which will be around for another 10, 20 years, and then the future. And I think we have to constantly be thinking about what can we do with the old estate and what do we do with the new estate. The new estate has to grapple with the ridiculously complex problem of dealing with super high density AI-based workloads. And we're talking 100 kilowatt racks and higher. Liquid cooling is the only way forward. In existing data centers, most of the big ones have designed the capability to retrofit some liquid cooling, but it's going to be limited. But to me, the only innovation that we can really adapt right away is to raise the temperature of the air cooling in the older data centers. It gets immediate energy savings, and then to retrofit liquid cooling where possible. And that's going to be 1 or 2 customer deployments, not the whole building. Right. That's really where I see. And that's the only way we can handle the tension that AI is demanding. It's like, okay, the AI has to go into the next generation of data center.
Do you want to do that?
Yeah, and I also want to set the stage, right? I think we talk about the densification of the workload, but let's put it in perspective. I think like your oven at home is between 5 and 8 kW of heat that's generated. That's what we were cooling in the past. Today, if you're talking about 100 kW rack, 500 1 megawatt racks, what does that really mean? And I did some math, and per cubic volume of a blast furnace consumes about 400 to 500 kW of energy total. Wow. That's for a blast furnace. Now we're cooling that in a same volumetric space, but twice the density for the 1 megawatt rack. How do we do it? This is why we have to make sure that we have the right technology and being responsible with that cooling.
I think you mentioned, a novelty that you were working on.
well, not a novelty. There's, I think, 2 things I wanted to add, comment, and then give the outlook there as well. I think that the one thing is I appreciate that we meanwhile have a discussion how to adopt that technology, liquid cooling, while if you look back like 12, 18 months or so, was still a discussion like whether we need to do that. It's much more now, how do we do that? How do we cope with that? And so the technology is out there to use it to do it. And exactly formats like this to bring the different parts of the industry together to do that, accelerate that is, I think, the right way of doing it. We're not there yet, but we are getting better at it. Talking where we are going with stuff, one thing we've always embraced is to stick with pure water, which is easier to integrate into things because they have no environmentability concerns and other stuff. It's easier because you don't need any special training or stuff with that. Trying to be with high temperatures because it is easier in the data center world to deal with that and having even more constrained cooling environments. And then deploy it across the globe, whether that's in Norway, where it's cooler, maybe we won't need that, or in Southern Europe, where it makes a lot more sense to have higher temperatures. And then also in the way we look at form factors, because at the end you need to put physical stuff into a data center to still stick, and we are criticized for that internally, externally at times, still to the 19-inch rack form factor. Because the majority of data centers out there have standardized outside takeoff space on a 19-inch form factor. And that's why we're doing that, so customers can, in the existing data centers, adopt liquid cooling technology. And that might not sound like rocket science, but it's difficult to do. Yeah, it's difficult to do engineering-wise to cramp all the heat density into the 19-inch form factor. And we are sticking to that for the reason of being able to basically on a brownfield approach to integrate it into that.
Right. Do you guys have examples of any innovation? I know, Christian, you had some.
Yes, in Norway, as you know, it's mostly cold and wet. We have, I think, 98% renewable energy. So to have a data center in Norway or in the Nordics is, from this point of view, of course, very sustainable. But the members of the association, the operators, I feel they are really making an effort. For example, two of the members, Green Mountain and Leftal, they have a concept called fjord cooling. They are located near the sea, and then they go down to about 70, 80 meter depth and collect the cold 8 to 10 degree water. And there is no water usage. It's only closed systems, like you also said before. And the only thing is that the cold water passes a heat exchanger. And since the data center industry uses quite a lot of power for cooling, this is a very sustainable concept, and also the cost for the cooling is a lot less using fjord cooling, for example. But this is of course niche. This isn't applicable everywhere. But I think from the sustainable point, it's important that we, where it is possible, use local advantages like a colder climate or such concepts. It's of course not for everything. Not every data center can be in the Nordic, and not every data center can have fjord cooling. But I think where those concepts are available, we should welcome that they can be implemented.
Right. So I'm with the International Research Center in AI under the auspices of UNESCO, and all of my teammates have agreed on a policy that we, no matter which engagement we have, we sort of like have to ask something about the Global South. We made it like a mission. So I wanted to ask you guys, do you know of any sort of like Global South innovation spaces for data centers? As far as I understand, a lot of these are going to be built across the sub-Saharan Africa and so on.
So I have one direct, one indirect. The direct one is the Singaporean government, which is right in the equator. You might not call that the global south from an economic point of view, but from an environment point of view, is forced data center operators licenses to use their excess heat to help them do desalination. This technology has been tested, and so it's a low temperature desalination solution, and this could be deployed anywhere. The other thing is that the latest generation of cooling equipment, which is more expensive from a capital point of view, but are completely closed circuit, zero water, low GWP chilling systems, can be used in water scarce areas. So I think someone's just announced a data center in Barcelona for CoreWeave, and the vendor there has used it, and they've got a power usage effectiveness of 1.15, zero water. So an exceedingly efficient system. It's quite expensive, but these kind of systems could be deployed anywhere in the world, especially in water-stressed areas. The reality of the situation, if you look at Africa, where I know the company I used to work for has built some data centers, their problem is energy access. And in fact, many of them are operating anywhere from 50 to 75% in diesel generators. So cooling is not an issue. It's energy access.
Right.
It's the real issue right now.
This is not meant to be like a sort of like panel monologue. If you guys have any questions, please do come forward. Anyone at this point? Everybody's tired after lunch? You
Good.
want to go? Yeah? You want to try?
What role, if any,
It's just if you want to wait for the mic.
We're being recorded.
I have loads of questions, but I don't think that's the point, right? You guys should sort of like chime in.
thank you. What role, if any, does software controlling the data center have to play?
Go ahead.
I could take that, right? From a infrastructure standpoint on the cooling infrastructure, you really do need a software layer that's fully integrated from the beginning and understand the solution end to end, because the only way we can work efficiently is that if each piece does its job. I use a scenario where, a vehicle that was built in the 90s is essentially the same set of parts that are being built today. But the cars today are 2-3 times more efficient than they were 20, 30 years ago. And it's really the software layer that allows that. I see the same on the mechanical cooling side. Without it, you have a set of parts that may or may not work well together.
I would add to that. I think that's a key requirement, and there's still a lot of space for improvement on that. It starts on basic things like, do we agree on an API layer between the IT and the facility side? But the thing I wanted to add to that is we've seen in the research space, and again, some of the stuff that we are using today, including liquid cooling, comes from academia and research space. They looked into efficiency from a kind of energy to solution versus time to solution perspective. So we collaborated together with, speaking of Barcelona, and we didn't make this up really, this is kind of coincidental, the Barcelona Supercomputing Center. They have started, together with other clients in Europe, create a piece of software which is called Energy Aware Runtime, ER, like this, but and they've also kind of spin off a small company to support that and keep developing it. What it actually does is, without changing the application, it looks at the main loop of the computation and tries to understand, and it does it fairly well, kind of where can I optimize kind of with a little bit of lower power, accepting a longer runtime, but still optimizing basically the area under the curve, right? So you run a little longer, but you reduce the energy over time much more than you add to the runtime. And again, to make it a bit more specific, funny enough, on Tuesday we had a customer panel with our kind of key customers that help us engineering going forward. And we looked at some stuff that was not just HPC, but also AI training things. So we tried to adopt this to AI, which is not one-on-one. And we saw for something like, if you accept like a 10% maybe longer runtime, you're still getting 20%, 23% lower energy. And the thing is, this is not like clocking your GPU down on a TDP level. You can do that today, of course, in our systems as well. This is a dynamic at runtime feature that figures out what's the best way to do that for the application. Yeah. So, and that's I think a very innovative approach that's proven could be applied to a lot more applications out there to really look at energy to solution versus just run it.
Did you, Tuan, want to?
Yeah, I want to add to that, right? I think to further answer the question on software, of course, we want it to operate efficiently, but we also want it to be resilient. And part of it, can we have predictive analytics, look at the power consumption or the telemetry in the server to create additional buffer in the mechanical plant? Basically, can you lower down the water slightly to build additional heat sink as we see heat workload being introduced onto the IT equipment. So that's part of where AI can really help accelerate that and really optimize, but also predict and help provide that buffer that's needed.
Are you happy with the answer? Yeah. Anyone? Anyone? Yeah, go for it.
Hi, thank you. I'm more curious from an innovation perspective, understanding whether circularity is a possibility, as it has been a consideration, particularly with the usage of water, but equally looking at heat storage and reutilizing that heat, that you can create a more integrated system and approach to responsible data center management, and how perhaps advanced, if any, you are on that particular journey, if you have considered it.
I can go chapter and verse on that, but maybe you've got some.
I can take a first one. And
Yeah, sure.
You can
I got a lot
make it
from
a bit
that.
more comprehensive picture. So you may have heard me talking about kind of looking at temperature ranges, also on the water cooling side, because exactly we have that in mind. And it was one of the early customer requirements we got as well is, can we make the water temperature that comes out of the liquid cooling loop reusable to some extent, right? And that's why we are aiming at having the high temperatures. So when you come out with like 50, 55 degrees at the end, you can still do kind of campus heating or building heating. And that's actually being done. So that's a reality today, just to be very clear, because some say, okay, this is academic exercise. No, it's not. We have customers in Frankfurt and other places in Europe as well who are actively doing that. Darmstadt is one of the universities there. They're injecting it actually into their campus heating system to pre-warm it, because temperature is not sufficient to reach the complete temperature level they would like to have. We have the Potsdam Institute of Climate Impact Research. I think the name implies a certain responsibility. They do their campus heating with some of the waste heat that goes out of that. So this can be done. It is done technology-wise already as well. But to keep it into context, right, that's probably a small fraction of the heat. Yeah, unless you have a really large campus and nothing else. But typically, if you have like a 1 megawatt compute system, maybe 5 to 10% you would actively use for heating. Otherwise, you're creating saunas of your buildings, right? And yeah.
And actually, that's an important point. So it's 5%, 5 to 10% on that campus. But over the overall data center facilities I mentioned earlier, about 2,500 data centers, probably less than 1% are reusing heat today. And this is really weird, because the data centers are actually willing to put in place the capital and the operating cost to create the heat transfer. And we're willing to give this heat away for free. And even offering all that, we have less than 1% uptake. So to me, the real issue here is not that we haven't innovated or can't do really cool things. It's that the demand side is the weakness in this equation, not the supply side. We need to create some demand side incentives. I don't know if that's regulatory. I mean, under the Energy Efficiency Directive, heat networks should be knocking on our door, and we are working with Euro Heat and Power, which represents that trade, that industry. We're looking at models to drive this, but they're under a different time frame. You know, they're looking to build 4th and 5th generation heating networks that can take 50-degree temperature heat. They've got existing Gen 1, 2, and 3 networks that they don't have the capital to upgrade, and they don't have to decarbonize until 2050. We have to decarbonize before 2030. So, you know, adding scope 3 emissions to our data centers by putting in heat transfer units that aren't being used is a real problem for us. So there's a timing problem that we need to get regulators involved to help drive some demand.
I see that Christine is getting very passionate there.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
I agree with what Michael says, and I think for data centers, the reuse of waste heat is mandatory.
Yes.
But what with those producing steel, aluminium, other things? There are some examples in the Nordics where this waste heat is reused, but it's nothing mandatory. And for example, if governments would incentivize taking this heat, using it, creating value with it, then I think we could solve the problem that there are not enough off-takers, because that's the problem. it's not the core business of a data center to do something with the waste heat. Some in Norway now have lobster farms or giving it to salmon farms so the fish can stay longer on land and grow faster. And there are a lot of good cases, but in a larger scale, I think incentives in form of tax benefits or something, I don't know, what would have to resolve this this problem. And of course you can say, yes, but if we have 45 degrees and from aluminium plant it's 90 degrees, it's something different. Yes, but it would give a motivation to more people, also startup companies, to think about what can we do with this heat. So that's not called waste heat, but seen as valuable ingredients in something like industrial symbiosis, that around the data centers there are different other players that then also can do something with the heat. That's not applicable everywhere. But I think it would be less exotic if there would be something, but without this, but without an incentive or a regulator saying it's a must for everybody, it's going to take a lot more time.
Tuan, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, I think from an innovation standpoint, there are technologies that exist today in the cooling side that can use waste heat, but it's typically a higher quality heat that's being generated from data centers. Data centers coming off, even liquid cooling is relatively low heat quality that has very limited use. If it was higher, you can use it to actually produce chilled water, absorption chillers and other things, but it relies on having a much higher heat quality, higher temperature in the water, essentially. Right now we have to manage as an ecosystem between the silicon developers and how to cool it. How do we make sure that we get that heat so that it can be more attractive and expand the use? Otherwise, it will continue to be very limited because there are limited uses for that, and because data centers produce a lot of it in one location, distribution becomes a problem for district heating and stuff. So
there's one other thing you mentioned, heat storage. I know of only one city in Europe where we can do heat storage scale, and that's Amsterdam. And it's the unique mix of sand and water that Amsterdam sits on, being marshland that has been recovered land. If you look at Helsinki, all of our data centers live on granite. Granite's not a very good thing to store heat in because it's really hard to get the heat into the granite. It's very easy to get the heat into the sand and water, and it doesn't move. The sand becomes an insulator that stores it. So we actually build up heat bulbs below the ground in Amsterdam, which are then tapped into in the wintertime when the heat's valuable by a university campus. So there is that kind of technology, but it's very specific. It's very geography, location-based type solutions. I don't know. Any other technology that I think is important is anything we could do to deliver a higher quality heat out. Because if we could get that heat up to a high enough level, we could even potentially use it ourselves. Yeah. We could use it ourselves for adsorption cooling, which is cool technology, it's been around for ages. The other one that's interesting is there are companies that are getting 10% heat recovery from low quality waste heat, and that's electricity. That sounds small, but given that a data center might use 100 megawatts of power, if I could get 10 free megawatts of power continuously by using this thermal pump, it's very inefficient in a certain sense, but it's better than zero. It's something. So that is a technology that we're looking at. There is an ROI on these models is less than 5 years, so it's business friendly. It's a possibility to do something like that.
You happy with the answers? Is that okay?
Yeah, I'll say I get it. But my sentiments was being more proactive as opposed to waiting for regulation and whatnot, because that takes time.
Yeah.
But if it represents a business opportunity or new business models that can be ventured out from your existing businesses, then why not? If commercial could be made.
Should we do this, or should we skip the regulation?
Well, the regulations are there because you've said it. We are regulated. If we build a data center over 1 megawatt, we must provide a physical place for us to offload heat to a third party. We're required to do it. So the data center market is more than happy to do this. And we've got examples going back 10, 12 years now, long before regulations. It's just not scaling. The other side of the equation is not buying our product.
Right.
That's the problem. How do we drive the buying?
Did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I would just kind of reinforce that we also had a discussion also on what the Germans put with the energy efficiency law, the Efficiency Act on the EU side as well. And similar, there was a lot of heated debate, including I had a discussion also with the authority for the environment in Germany about that, and how strict they put that into the act itself. Yeah. And there was a lot of upcrying saying, "Oh, we can't do that," but it was finally done. But I'm saying that to underline, I think, from a data center perspective, there's a lot of regulation in place already. It's very clear, and also from a timeline perspective, very specific. So that's very near term, right? What was really missed in that was the opportunity to make sure there is a taker on that. Or if there isn't, there is enough incentive or enough regulation enforcement, yeah, to make that happen as well. But I think that's a lesson learned, and that's spreading. So I'm confident we'll see some of that.
Anyone else? Yeah, one question we have.
I'm curious, and this is not my field, so it might be a bit naive question, but I'm curious about how the options are for using other fluids than water. I think I read an article about using synthetic-based fluids, like hydrocarbon-based fluids that are biodegradable. What are the obstacles for that? What are the options for that?
I can have a first one. You can correct or amend whatever you prefer. Occasionally, I get approached with kind of similar projects on that, and you need to look at two things. One is the immersion cooling stuff, where typically most of these fluids come into play, and they are then easy and they're not doing harm and stuff like that, biodegradable. But then you start asking the cost for that, then it gets prohibitive, even at scale, and then you need to ask yourself the question: what problem are we actually solving? Yeah, because as I commented earlier on, I think immersion cooling has a limited space. It has a limited space, and most of these liquids are more targeting the immersion space. And then the second part of that is typically when these requests come to me, and I ask a couple of times who is the real end customer, you're going to find out that the end customer is by surprise producing these liquids. So I'm saying that because at this point, it just reconfirms that I don't think there's a real business case for these fluids at this point in time, because I'm not sure what exactly they are solving as a problem.
Yeah.
There's also a technical challenge. The limitation with immersion cooling is that there's a limitation on the density that it can actually remove heat compared to the direct-to-chip. So with the technology moving for densification, it becomes a limitation, and the economics don't line up. So I think there's some headwinds against that.
I think you got to recognize that in a data center, there's actually two parts of the cooling. There's the server that generates the heat, the silicon, which has to get that heat out of the server before the server melts. Then there's the building's cooling infrastructure that has to remove that heat from the building and get it outside. And so you actually ultimately are conflating two different technologies. It's not a stupid question. It's complicated. So in a data center in the building, most of that cooling infrastructure is going to be a water-based with some form of antifreeze or some other type of chemical that helps make that water efficient. But that's a closed loop. We're not losing any water. The water is just moving the temperature inside and outside the building. Then outside the building, you've got to get rid of the heat. Now, you can just blow it out with a fan using something called free air cooling. Uses no water, doesn't use any refrigerants. You could use a chiller. A chiller has refrigerants. It's an air conditioning system. Or you could evaporate water, especially in a hot climate. And evaporation is the most efficient way to get rid of heat. That uses water. So that's the only part of cooling of a data center that's going to waste water, other than there's humidification. We have to manage the humidity of the room. And that can consume water, but not a lot. So water is either in the building circuit or water is being evaporated to remove the heat. And you can choose water or another technology. The vegetable oils and synthetic oils, et cetera, that are non-conductive are the things that you would put at the computer, because the computer in water will short circuit. The electricity will go through the water and it'll blow. So you need an oil type, some synthetic oil that does not conduct electricity. And that's the problem, is it's potentially got fluorocarbons in it. These are banned. It's potentially got a high global warming potential. It potentially is poisonous. It's potentially very expensive. And so you only use it in very bespoke solutions where it justifies that cost. Yeah.
Thank you. So you mentioned about efficiency as well, and about the secondary loop. So inside of the data center and antifreeze as a cooling medium. What's the point if you lose with glycol around 20% of efficiency, and the glycol degrades over time? What's the point of actually what's problem does it solve if there will not be like a -5 degrees Celsius inside?
Sorry, I say an antifreeze, a glycol-based solution, a refrigerant-type liquid mixed with the waters. The problem is the water is the primary transport vehicle, and the refrigerant is what's actually moving the temperature. It captures the temperature. Think red blood cells in your blood. Most of your blood is plasma. It moves it around. The red blood cell is what does the actual chemical reaction.
But can't you just use distilled water instead of mix with glycol? Because you lose 20.
Yeah, I think there was probably
I'm sorry.
misunderstanding.
I'm sorry. Yes, it's less efficient, and so you have to have more pumps. You have to have more. So it's really just a cost basis. It might be a larger system, and you might not have the space for that larger system. There's a cost-benefit analysis.
I'm just thinking, where is the win if you go with?
So let me maybe to have a different try at. I think maybe to avoid confusion. So within the loop that's in the server, and that then goes to the heat exchanger, and that then couples the heat out into the building.
Yeah.
Within that inner loop in the server, that is water. There's no. I know there are some other solutions out there that use glycol, and I'll tell you why they do that. They do that because they want to ship a complete system from the manufacturing side, put it on air fried, and don't worry. That's why glycol is in there. Because of the bad efficiency, the bad impact for the environment, we choose to do it differently, but that means we drain it in the factory after testing, pressure testing, filling it and draining it again, and then pressure test it on site again, and basically refill it on site, but we think it's a better solution for the environment and for the customer.
Yeah.
Compute says we have 2 more minutes. So if anyone has a short question, otherwise I have one farewell question for each speaker. No? Okay. So for you guys, all 4 of you, if you would have unlimited materials, capital, favorable policies, best talent at your disposal, what kind of AI infrastructure project would you build to radically transform the way we deploy and scale AI? Not just for business, but also for society, in the sense that you have mentioned innovation, but what would have been your blue sky project, if you have any?
I have a trick answer, so you guys start.
Yeah.
Well, I think from an infrastructure provider perspective and solution provider perspective, that is of course a question I could dream up the perfect infrastructure now, but I'll not do that, because I think there's no point in you having the perfect infrastructure. It needs to fit your purpose, right? Doesn't mean it's perfect for me. So I would rather say I would use these infinite resources to do what we are doing here a lot more. Get into that discussion, both from a regulatory perspective, from an industry standard perspective, and form a much tighter integration, because I think this will yield business value for the companies using our solutions, at the same time going to be good for the planet, yeah, and for society. So I would not build an AI infrastructure. I think there are enough built today already, and if you want to build a few more, we are here, but I wouldn't try to do the perfect blueprint.
Yep. Christine, you want to try?
Yes, I think since to get some tax incentives to get more off-takers could take time, I would perhaps go for a program aimed at startup companies or companies to educate them about the possibilities to get the warmth from the data centers, and then perhaps have a large hackathon to find the best solutions and then invest in the 3 best solutions.
For me, I think, we talked about future-proofing the infrastructure is to really prevent the waste, right? How do we develop solution that can be quickly deployed, have the agility to match the changes in the IT stack and hardware so that we don't have waste and rebuild and ripping out and have that vicious cycle. So deploy it just in time to match the IT hardware.
I put all the money into rewriting the software code. Software is ridiculously inefficient. I think we need to start a green coding program in Europe. We need to be funding education to teach people how many computer cycles does every single line of your code use. And we're talking about factors of 100 to 1. Okay, 101. That's how good green coding can be. So
Can I add
green
to that to just cheer the audience up a little bit? We were discussing with some of the key clients earlier this week already, and I noticed they shared that openly, so I can share it here as well. Is in the past, HPC guys would get kind of time on a compute system, right? They would get so and so many core hours.
Yeah.
Now they're getting a CO2 footprint.
Yeah.
That changed the KPI, and then you change behavior. So that would add to
The
that.
user has to buy the carbon offset for all the IT cycles they consume.
While this conversation ends in the pub, probably. Ladies and gentlemen, keep it cooling, and thank you very much. The session is over, unfortunately. Thank you very much.
Thank
Thank you. Thank you to all the
Thank you very
speakers.
much. It was fun. Thank you.